And welcome back, everyone, to another edition of Going for Two, presented by our good friends at Home Field Apparel. I am your host, publisher of the Extra Points newsletter. I'm Matt Brown. I'm joined here by my D1 Ticker colleague, Bryan Fischer. How you holding up, man?
I'm doing good. I think like most of the country now, especially after this cold weather front out west, just doing well, staying bundled up a little bit. But I'm excited. This is kind of the best time of the year in terms of college football. We have a lot happening. It was another great week on that front, and some fun times around the D1 Ticker office as well.
Yeah, that's good. I'm feeling good too. It was unusually warm, and in my neck of the woods here. And then I'm about to skip town before it gets cold. We can talk about that there a little bit. I'm feeling good that I'm not digging through College Football Reference, looking up games around Taylor Swift album releases, which I stupidly decided to spend most of my Sunday afternoon doing. If something seems like a good idea that will engage college football Reddit, might be, but
that had to be up there. But like, did you even listen to the album before?
No, I haven't heard it yet. I don't dislike Taylor Swift. I just don't have strong feelings one way or the other. My musical tastes are extraordinarily dad. And not just dad, but I think the subgenre of dad that's like ex-band nerd dad. So if it's like, oh, this is a front man, if the band name is like so-and-so and the something else's, or something else is like an 8-piece band with like a tenor saxophone, I'm probably really into that, which is, if it's Nathaniel Rateliff and the Night Sweats, great. If it's whatever Taylor Swift is doing, I'm sure it's fine. It's just like, it's not really my thing. I'll wait for my kids to tell me about it.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, I have not like carved out time because I just know my wife's a big Swiftie or whatever they call themselves. You know, so, like, I know I'm going to hear it in the car. She likes to drive to Taylor Swift, so I know between shuttling the kids around, I'm sure I'm going to get the full album treatment. But yeah, it's definitely not. I don't dislike her either, just like you, but like it's not necessarily my cup of tea in terms of like these are my three genres and I stick to them.
Yeah, I mean, I don't drive that much, so I'm not as exposed to top 40 radio. And if I am driving, I'm usually with a kid that demands something else. But anyway, this is not why you turned in here into the show to talk about Taylor Swift. That's what every other sports podcast is for. We're here to talk about some other things. I am going actually. By the time you guys listen to this show, I'll be in Charlotte. I'm going to be there from Tuesday until Friday. You drop me a line if you guys are in town. My Twitter handle is Matt Brown EP. I'm not going for any sporting event exactly. I'm actually going for the Sports Marketing Association conference, which I want to go to because a big part of what I do at Extra Points is I talk to academics and I talk to people that are studying sports marketing, and that means this is a lot of white papers about NIL. About how schools sell tickets, how they price tickets, what happens with sponsorships, some real inside baseball money stuff, but which is important because that shapes what schools end up doing. So I'm going to try to learn about more of that research. And if you're interested, I can tell you about some of the papers I'm hoping to catch. I'm going to do some shilling for D1 Classroom. I'm going to speak at a big panel about NIL with a few other people in this industry. Was not expecting this to now also be like the next epicenter of where college football news was happening, though, which is terrible news for like what I wanted to do in Charlotte. But, college football and God wait for no man. By now, I'm sure you've seen Charlotte is now looking for a new football coach.
That's right. Will Healy getting the axe. I think everybody kind of expected him to be a little bit on the hot seat just based on the way things went last year, kind of coming into the year, and then starting off like they did. They lost to FIU over the weekend. It just was not something that was working out, and so I think the change ended up being made. And we joke about kind of the Power Five firings that kind of happen week after week. You typically don't necessarily get the Group of Five coaches getting shuffled out the door just because there's either maybe not necessarily a guy that you can kind of go to on staff to actually be the interim head coach. A lot of times it's just like, are you really getting a huge jump on the market by letting somebody go, this early? But, it's an interesting mix because I think this could be one of the more attractive jobs, not necessarily, in terms of the Power Five, but in terms of the Group of Five, I think this could be one of the more attractive jobs that coaches really want to go after, knowing the potential there in Charlotte. So that is going to make for a very interesting coaching carousel edition.
I want to talk about this job here for a little bit, right? We spent whole episodes about Nebraska and about Arizona State and those places. And you're right. This is a unique gig in a couple of different ways, right? For one, In case you are unaware, every podcast is somebody's first. Charlotte is not one of those G5 teams that's been playing for 100 years. Their first season of FBS football was 2015, and it's not like they were in FCS for 20 years, plotting a move up here. It's an extremely new program. It's a program that, candidly, has never been successful. The best season in school history. This was Healy's first year. They go 7-6 and lose the Bahamas Bowl. It's the only time they've ever finished above 500. They've only come close a couple of times. The last year did not end the way that Charlotte wanted. There was some expectations around the program. From what I was hearing in and around the program and from the agent world, this was not something that was like, the school did not go into this year thinking they were going to have to fire Will. But when you get bodied by a not very good Florida International team and looked pretty uncompetitive in some of these other games, and the defense never really getting around, and some other concerns about roster management, about where things were going, you kind of have to make a decision. If a Power 5 program was facing this trajectory, they definitely would have made this move. You're right, though. Typically, the financial incentives to move early are not as much there. So, new program, no real history of success, no real history, period. That's both a positive and a negative thing. You are in a really important city, in the city, right? And Charlotte is growing area, a place that has a lot of high school football talent, and not just in Charlotte, but you go into Rock Hill, South Carolina, you go across the state line. There's a lot of good players, a lot of players that aren't necessarily going to go to ACC programs or SEC programs. You might be able to be competitive there. So there's a lot of reporters there, a lot of media outlets there, and a lot of money there, as Charlotte has become a banking center, and there is money to be raised from sidewalk alumni and from people that went to Charlotte but never haven't engaged at their athletic department in a long time. And there's hope. Hey, long term, this could be a program that has some resources. You have a really nice stadium. It's a small stadium, but it's new and it's modern and it's pretty nice. The concern that I would have, beyond the fact that you've never won anything and you are still trying to train a fan base, which is a challenging thing. Charlotte's changing conferences. They are playing in the American next year, right? Is it next year? Like my internet, the brain's muddled here. So this is the problem, because right now, this is not an athletic department that has a $75 million budget.
Not even close. Not even close to that. But you're right. I think everybody sees Charlotte as the potential, right? They are so new, and they do kind of remind me a little bit of the early days of USF, and just, there were some struggles to kind of get things going, and then they found kind of Jim Levitt, and they eventually found success. And Charlotte's kind of in the same same kind of trajectory, I guess you could say, because you are in a talent-rich area. You can get down into Georgia pretty quickly, and kind of mine those gaps for the Power 5 players that kind of get overlooked. I think it's an attractive city as well. For some of the guys that might be coming down from the Power 5 level in the transfer portal as well. You can come and be in a major city, kind of be experience life at a college around there. And I think from just a standard of living, a lot of coaches would like to be around there. They know they could attract assistants to live in Charlotte and easily recruit in Charlotte, given that that is a hub for American Airlines, so you can probably get just about anywhere in the country pretty easily as well. So I think there are a lot of attractiveness about the job itself, and the programs themselves are going to have to go through a transition, because the American is really betting on the upside of Charlotte, and I think the next head coach is going to have to do that as well.
This might be a me thing, rather. So I fully recognize this might be a blind spot for Matt Brown, but I think, generally speaking, sleeping giants tend to stay asleep, and it is difficult for demographics alone to become destiny to shift a program that seems like they should have a lot of potential on paper. It's really kind of elevating that station a little bit. This was part of the mistake that the last version of Conference USA made. I think they bet on a couple of different expansion teams in big markets that didn't really pan out. And that isn't to say that Charlotte can't pan out, and those fundamentals of, hey, academically selective institution, but decent enrollment size, growing city, alumni base in an area that is young enough and has money that could potentially contribute. And clearly it's a place that cares about football, high school football, college football, professional football, all those things. You'd want all of that. And it's not like the American is a league of giant killers necessarily, now that it's going through some attrition. But I had the tab open here. It looks like you got an annual budget of in the high 30s. for your athletic department. And even a small American athletic program on the lower side, something like an ECU is still $5-6 million more than that. And what a USF or a Memphis or some of the other, a bigger budget things, elite schools in there are going to be 10-15 million or more, if not more than that. And that matters not just for athletic department salaries, because I think you're right. You might not necessarily always have to be the high bidder to be able to be competitive for staff, given quality of life and proximity to recruits. But it's going to matter with facilities. It's going to matter with athlete experience. And remember, they're also not going to get the same media revenue distribution share as a new member as some of the legacy members are going to get. So this is a job where they already weren't being especially competitive in what, quite frankly, is a pretty bad league. Presumably are going to move into a more difficult league. And now there's going to be a lot of more pressure on athletic director Mike Hill and this university to not just hire the right coach, but then build up the infrastructure to support that person. And that's why I look at this and say, I'm not saying it's a bad gig. I know a lot of people have ties to North and South Carolina, and there's a lot of quality assistants that I think it could do well in this role. I just look at it and think, like, I wonder if this is one of those jobs that's going to be a really great gig for the coach that they hire after they hire this particular coach, because there's a lot of building that has to happen here beyond just finding football recruits and winning games. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. I mean, you mentioned the kind of base there that they need to continue to build. I mean, this is just such a new program, right? And there's no history. You can't go in there and sell, hey, you remember that one time we made a bowl game like that? That's it. They don't have much to kind of grab onto. And
yeah, it's like one time we beat Duke, and that's it.
And so, I think a lot of it is just about kind of establishing a culture, which, this is very much a blank slate. That you're going to be the third head coach in the history of the program. So, there's a lot that you can kind of put as an imprint. And I think a lot of coaches truthfully view it as a bit of a stepping stone. If you do well, if you can get Charlotte to not only winning, getting back to bowl games, but, winning 7-8 games, especially in the newly constituted American, that's going to generate some Power 5 interest, especially along the ACC schools and SEC schools that are kind of in the region, if you can do that. Yeah. So, I know a lot of coordinators and assistants at the Power 5 level, I think very, very much eyeing this position and knowing that it could be that kind of big leapfrog opportunity if you get things right. But the inherent challenges are certainly there. And, it's not just competing in a tougher conference moving forward. There are going to be budgetary challenges moving forward as well. You're not just as much as you want to be kind of that Charlotte's, town, college or whatever. They always term Northwestern, Chicago's Big Ten team.
Don't even, yeah.
That's what Charlotte ultimately wants to be, but that's just such a melting pot now of people from all over the country that are moving there that still have their allegiances to not only a Duke or a North Carolina, but to Georgia Tech or to an SEC program like Florida or Georgia or whatnot. So
yeah.
That's the other thing that you can to get new fans and build up that fan base. It could take 5, 10, 15 years before you get alumni that are ready to not only come back for games, but start giving to the program. So it is a big challenge. And this is kind of the first wave. And I do understand why you would say maybe it's better to be the guy after the guy in this case, since Will Healy got fired. But I think that truthfully, a lot of coaches that want that experience of running the program do view the opportunity and do view what this job can represent, probably a little bit more with more rose-colored glasses than you do.
Which is fair. That is why I'm a doofus sitting at a desk and not coaching a football program, right? Like if I was a linebackers coach at UNC or a defensive coordinator somewhere, I might think differently. I do not by any means think this is the hopeless job.
Well, and I think to just interrupt you just a second,
please.
I think it is also helping Charlotte's case right now to not only, I think you could question in terms of the timing of letting Will Healy go, and maybe not the decision itself, but in terms of the timing. But the thing about Charlotte that they do have going for it is it might not be that active of a group of 5 coaching market. So now you can kind of leverage, that into maybe a better candidate list than you normally would, say on a cycle last year when things got crazy and you're having openings like Colorado State and Nevada and a lot of these group of 5 programs that do have a little bit of semblance of history and have had success recently, but that might not necessarily be the case this year. And so I think that's why maybe the interest for, at least from the coaching community, is a little bit higher in an opportunity like this than it would be in say a normal cycle where there's 25, 35 jobs open.
I want to just plant one other seed here evaluate this job outside the scope of just the football coach here. And this is, I think, the other thing that is interesting to me about Charlotte. We were talking off air. It may be the case a little bit with FAU. Could be the case with a couple of other institutions. You're looking at a school right now that's in the process of trying to significantly increase its total athletic budget, increase its facilities, increase its athletic infrastructure in a bunch of different ways to be competitive with new conference peers, right? You are ambitious about the future, and you're going to need a lot of money to get there. Now you also have to bring in a new head coach and potentially somebody that was more expensive than Will Healy. The school took a chance on him a little bit, pulling him out as a pretty young guy out of the FCS. Not a place where you might not assume that the head coach is going to make $1.6 million, I think, coming in. But college sports is also different now, because I think if you are a football coach, you're not necessarily looking to establish an NIL collective or some kind of recruiting fund at a place like Charlotte so you can win recruiting battles against NC State. I think at the G5 level, that would be unusual. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. It would be unusual, especially at a place that has a deeper basketball tradition. NIL money at that school might want to go to basketball before it goes to football. But if you're a coach wanting to take this job, you also probably want to know what the school and that the fan base is going to be able to do enough that you could be able to say to, hey, my all-conference linebacker, if you stay here rather than transferring to NC State, you know that X, Y, and Z may be made available to you. And the way, if I was an athletic director, the perfect world would be, and yes, and the thing what we can offer you here is look at our influencer branded NIL exchange and look at the ways that you could potentially take advantage of NIL and grow into these opportunities. And all that stuff's important and true, but they're also going to be looking at what's my base compensation, right? What is something that I know that can be available to me, especially as other G5 football programs are being able to say, we're not going to match you dollar for dollar, but there is this group here that if you opt in and do this particular quid pro quo, you'll have $2,000, you'll have $3,000, or if you are a very popular person, more than that. To the best of my knowledge right now, that doesn't exist at Charlotte. And so now you have, I think, a bit of a potential challenge, because you have a finite amount of money. You have a finite number of donors right now. You have a lot of people who could become potential donors. Lord willing, your financial situation in a decade, or maybe less than that if you start winning, could change significantly. But right now, you don't have a ton of people who are writing 5-figure checks. You don't have a ton of people who are going to write, $150 checks. So as a coach, now you have to think, if I come here, will my donor community be most engaged in what's most important to me, which is player retention? Will they be most engaged with what may be more important to my school, which is fundraising for capital projects or infrastructure, which is needed for the entire athletic department, including football? Do I want to go work someplace where I might be told no? As an AD, and again, this is not me throwing a bomb at Charlotte, but I'm just saying here, do you have the capacity to expedite that donor growth process? All of these things here are kind of coming to a head at once, which for somebody that does not have any skin in the game makes this an interesting job to follow. And maybe that is something that becomes part of the calculus at a place like FAU, where you're not succeeding at the place at the rate you thought you might have with Willie Taggart, but your school's also in a similar boat. You don't have that much money, and you're going to have to spend a lot of money to reach parity with the new people that you're joining. Do you have enough to put it every place where it can be most meaningful right now?
Yeah, I mean, speaking of you, I talked with Brian White not too long ago about just the whole transition process and things that have been going good in terms of raising money and going down the path, but there's still a lot of work to do, right? And as much as you can still prepare, you look at a program like UTSA that is also making the moves. They've started this process beforehand. They've already locked up their coach. They've already put down the facilities upgrades. They've already committed a lot of these sums of money that Charlotte and FAU and others are just now starting to do. So you're going to be behind your conference peers as you move into the AAC, and that's not even getting into the ones that are already well established in the league that are remaining behind and not going to the Big 12. So a lot of things that a lot of coaches and I think it's going to be a fascinating search too, because this is a program that has gone with first-time head coaches both the last 2 hires. So is this something where you kind of go, we need somebody who maybe you want to label them a retread, sure, but maybe they understand some of the challenges, how to do more with less, and have been a head coach before. And so I think it will be an interesting mix of kind of young up and coming coordinators and whatnot, as well as some position coaches, that might be a little energetic, and that's certainly needed in a job like this, given how much selling that you're going to have to do. And I think there could be a few head coaches also throw their names in the mix that either have retired or doing other things that want to get that head coaching job back again. So I think it'll be a very interesting candidate pool, and I think it's one of the programs that, when we talk about college athletics, in general, how these schools kind of evolve, and where they kind of go from here in terms of that growth trajectory. Charlotte is certainly one of those that is on the list that you can kind of track, and this is where a lot of programs used to be before kind of establishing themselves, and Charlotte's kind of in that growth phase.
I don't have a whole lot of sympathy when I talk to somebody like in the Big Ten that's worried about money moving from capital projects to NIL when you've already built a lot of that stuff. I understand it's a different calculus at a G5 program or an FCS program or below that, or maybe you haven't. And it's not like you're necessarily trying to build opulent things. It may be literal human capital. So it's going to require, no matter what, a lot of selling. I am not going to sit here and say, like, I know who Charlotte should hire, because I have no idea. I just know that all of this will be a sales job. Speaking of sales jobs, let me go tell you about our dear friends at Home Field Apparel. They make the most comfortable, most unique, officially licensed collegiate apparel. I am wearing some Home Field right now because it is a day ending in Y, and I'm not at church or a professional event. So I'm wearing the retro UCLA shirt. Things didn't go the Bruins' way over the weekend, but their color scheme still slaps. So I'm going to still wear the shirt. Brian, I believe, is rocking the Blaster hoodie.
Oh, yeah.
That's a donkey with a dynamite stick in its mouth, which is always in season as far as I'm concerned, regardless of whatever is happening outside with the weather. Home Field is dropping some new refreshes and some new design drops here from a variety of G5 programs. I just saw the re-teasing here of the Illinois Rose Bowl shirt. That's not a G5 program, but shit, Illinois might make the Rose Bowl. So you better go buy the stuff now.
I covered Illinois the last time they made the Rose Bowl.
When was that? 2007?
2008?
2008.
All right.
I was still
somewhere around there. Yeah.
Yeah. I distinctly remember having my social life ruined by an Illinois upsetting Ohio State one weekend late in my college career. That caused wailing and gnashing of teeth. I have to look it up, and that's not good podcasting. But what is good podcasting is buying stuff from Home Field Apparel, because that subsidizes this podcasting, which is occasionally good podcasting. You can buy stuff at Home Field Apparel too by going to homefieldapparel.com and use promo code Extra Points when you do to save 15% off that first order. Again, buy some comfortable stuff with cool logos on it at homefieldapparel.com. I don't think I have a good segue off of the sales ramp. I was all proud of myself with the one to get us on there, but getting us off is so much harder. Off the sales trajectory and everything there. We don't have anybody else I think is going to immediately make any other big coaching changes. I did have a chance to talk about some potentially significant administrative changes on Extra Points this week as well. If you want to go quickly talk about that.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. So friends, before I was doing some very stupid posting on Extra Points about Taylor Swift, I did reach out to the West Coast Commissioner, Gloria Nevarez, about the NCAA Transformation Committee and also about some potential changes with the WCC. And she's a good person to talk about this kind of thing because, one, I think in general, she's a very thoughtful administrator. She leads an important mid-major league. She spent time in the Pac-12. She's been around other places. She's also on the dang Transformation Committee, so she does know what's being talked about there. I think the two things that would be of particular interest to this audience, when I was trying to get a little bit more information about what membership requirements might look like, and the WCC right now, I think it's appropriate to set the expectation here. Gloria doesn't seem to be expecting, and I'm not expecting any membership requirement that's going to be so onerous that anybody in the WCC would say we can't make this. We're dropping out of Division I. Whatever the cutoff line is, I feel pretty confident that Pepperdine and Pacific and Santa Clara are going to be above it. So you can recalibrate your expectations accordingly. But one of the things that's unique about the WCC, and she reminded me of this, is these are not mostly very big schools. They're mostly relatively academically selective. relatively modest enrollments. You're looking at 6,000, 7,000, for these private, several of them Jesuit, not all of them, but schools on the West Coast. Generally, that does not correlate to winning national championships, but they do. Not in basketball, although they've come close, but they have in soccer. They've been a multi-bid league in basketball. They've been a multi-bid league in baseball. They've been very competitive in volleyball, and it's the kind of league where you kind of pick your spots a little bit. You want to be competitive in everything that you do, but if you make the right investment in some Olympic sports, you can be extraordinarily competitive. Santa Clara won a national title in soccer like 2 years ago. I want to say for women's soccer, and her concern was, I want to say, I believe the correct quote was like, I hope that these changes will not become so expensive that they will make it impossible for us to do this in golf and volleyball, and that is I think appropriate to say is a mid-major concern. I don't think there's a ton of leagues. There are a couple, but there's not a ton where they're like, we're worried we're going to lose a bunch of guys that won't be able to stay in Division I. If you're in the NEC or the MAC, or maybe a couple of the low major leagues in the South, that may be a concern for a couple of your institutions, potentially, maybe, probably not for the WCC, but there are going to be cost increases. Like I think that was the direct quote. She's like, I believe the cost of being a Division I school is going to go up, which we've talked about on this show, I think, for the last year. But here's a direct quote from somebody who's actually on the dang thing. That whether that's scholarship increases, whether that's mental health therapist increases, trainer increases, licensing increases, any other kind of like a staffer to athlete ratio adjustment, that's all being talked about on the table. The other thing that I think may be of interest to this audience is talking about the NCAA tournament, because I think since we've last talked for a couple of times, I know John Rothstein said this. I've seen this from, I think, Goodman. I've seen this from a couple other people in the college basketball world. A very strong pushback to the idea of expanding the tournament at all, right? Like stronger, I think, than I had expected. And I asked her about this. Like, hey, I mean, I don't know about you, Brian, but when I talk to like league people about expanding the tournament, it's rare that I read anybody who's pounding the table like, by God, we've got to do this. This is an existential thing. And most of it's like, we'll look at it. It's not the most important thing in the world, but here's the intuitive reason why it makes sense to do it. And she reiterated, look, I don't know what you're reading on the internet. There's no direct proposal right now to do anything with the men's or women's NCAA basketball tournament. We are talking about, in theory, a potential principle to expand to 25%. And people are reacting to that, even though we're not down that line. But we in the WCC, a league that would probably benefit from an expanded tournament, went out of our way to reference, listen, we know how important this tournament is. We know how special it is. We are not interested in making any kind of radical change or stepping backward to compromise what makes this what it is. I am inferring from this, here is somebody that would potentially benefit from an expanded league on the committee. That did not sound like an endorsement of going to 96 teams to me.
Yeah, I think the disconnect, and maybe part of this is just driven by the news cycle that the Transformation Committee co-chair Greg Sankey has, I'll say, perpetuated a little bit in a few of the interviews, is that there has been so much focus on the basketball tournament. That's obvious. Anytime somebody says NCAA tournament, you're immediately going to think about the men's basketball tournament. So I think anytime you associate that with field size increases, there's going to be some worry. There's going to be certainly the basketball folks out there saying, wait a minute, we really can't do this. And I think the Transformation Committee, ultimately what they are going to send to the board really this week on Thursday is just kind of, here's the overarching principle, right? Here's something that sports committees can do. And it means a lot for women's golf or, cross country. I just, somebody said the other day that cross country got expanded. The field is going to be expanded for the first time since 1998. So there's been a lot of changes in terms of the size of Division I since 1998. And so you got a lot of, new programs that have added, sports, that have dropped sports, that, just the membership composition has changed. And for a lot of the let's face it, Olympic sports, there do need to be changes in terms of how things are run. There's being some new bracketing principles being thrown out there as well for things like women's soccer, like you mentioned, and others. I think just overall the focus has always been on men's basketball, just from an outside media perspective, but Gloria's right. I think there are a lot of other sports that are going to benefit from this type of proposal, and we'll see ultimately what ends up happening with the men's basketball tournament. I don't think they're necessarily going to touch it, but there's going to be a new NCAA president here not too soon, and I think that person will kind of set the agenda when it comes to what the NCAA tournament is going to look like, given this option to potentially expand the field.
Did you put in your application for to be the NCAA president?
I should have. I conducted that interview with the board chair, and I should have just slipped in my resume, but no, I did not. I don't think as hefty as that salary increase might be, and with the move to Indianapolis, I don't think that's a job that I necessarily want to handle at this point.
That job would just suck so much. I can't. As I'm at a point in my life where I think I could say this, and it literally isn't a joke. If you paid me $1.5 million to do that job, I think I would be less happy than I am right now, making substantially less than that. And that isn't me just dunking on having to live in Indianapolis, like that, because I could do that for $1.5 million.
Like that's not even the issue that I would have.
No.
I think just having two young kids and the travel demands that position really kind of entails, especially now as you're kind of trying to sell things to a lot of the membership. That more than anything would stick out to me as kind of the big hurdle that I would have. So maybe in like 10 or 15 years, when the kids are a little more grown up. But it's quite the challenge, and I'm going to be very curious as. I think Turnkey and the NCAA will play this very close to their vest, but in terms of actually who the candidate is, but eventually I think we might end up doing some Googling in terms of what the actual name is, and we'll react appropriately at that time. But it is interesting too, because I was just thinking about this as I was speaking to you. A lot of these proposals too coming around this Division I Transformation Committee, and you mentioned the WCC not getting affected by this. I know a lot of other kind of FCS or mid-major leagues have said, what, we don't think it's going to be too onerous. But the one thing that somebody pointed out to me last week when I was talking with them, that there might be some greater concerns about some of those minimums or adding positions, adding mental health requirements, is this could impact and certainly not it being an issue with the transformation committee saying, hey, we've got to do this and narrow down, but it could impact unproportionately the HBCUs and places where things are already tight. A lot of the FCS leagues that do have HBCUs already struggle for money, already struggle for a lot, just to fully fund a lot of their sports or their scholarships. And that would be the one thing that I would say keep an eye on the rest of this week and next. Now there will be ramp up periods. There'll be, things that they can do to help them, but that would be one area where I don't think there has been much discourse about in terms of, hey, if we do end up making these changes, here's where we can also help and kind of raise the floor at a lot of these places too.
Yeah, I have a similar concern has been raised to me. And I think part of the reason I haven't written about it or raised hell as much is because I don't know enough of the details about ramp up periods or waivers. One thing I do feel pretty comfortable saying on the air is the people on this committee that I have talked to on background are very sensitive to the idea of accidentally creating rules that would disproportionately hurt HBCUs. Or like if we create a membership cutoff and it's Chicago State and 6 HBCUs and they're the only schools that don't meet it, we won't be able to do that unless we give waivers or a long enough timeline or something else. If 27 schools don't decide to reclassify and 12 of them are HBCUs, that might be something that we could do, but you don't want to just nuke Coppin State or Maryland Eastern Shore or something. And if that's what the numbers say, then there's going to be some something tacked on to the end to eliminate that, because of course those schools are poor for things that's a systemic racism and history issue that is outside the scope of the NCAA, but they don't want to be the ones to cause disproportionate harm beyond what they've clearly already done. This has come up when I've asked people about the APR too, or what the future of what academic monitoring looks like, given what that has been. So when this reaches a draft, whenever they're ready to share that, and it's allegedly going to be relatively soon, it will be a draft. There will be hooting and hollering and revisions there, but hopefully we'll have a little bit more clarity beyond what Gloria shared with us in the near future. That conversation also includes, I think, some interesting admissions about WCC realignment and expansion and what kind of schools they would consider. That was news to me. It was different from the last time I talked to her, but you should go listen to it or read the story if you want to know what that is, because that means you are the kind of degenerate listening 34 minutes into this podcast for that information. Means you would probably enjoy either Extra Points or Collegiate Sports Connect, which I'm told is free, ? And has a bunch of other video content on it, right?
That would be correct. And I mean, come on, give the people what they want. They want to know who's replacing BYU in the WCC. Just throw it out there, Matt Brown. Come on now.
Okay. All right. This is, I mean, the whole thing is behind the paywall, but if you've listened this long and you haven't paid for the damn thing yet, what she did tell me was, hey, if you had talked to me in 2018, 2019, which I had before, and you had asked about membership, criteria for being in the West Coast Conference, I would have told you would have had to have been a private school. One of the things that makes the WCC really unique, and my argument would be that's really helped them, is very strong institutional identity. They're all church schools. And they're all church schools within a particular geography and a particular window of academic selectivity and budgets. And you have a couple of exceptions, but you're generally within those parameters, right? Which would mean that, say, a school like Utah Valley is not in those parameters. So, DOA. Now, you don't have to be Wikipedia Brown to look at a map and look at who's in Division I and realize there aren't that many other schools within like 500 miles of a WCC institution that fit that profile. It's Seattle, it's Grand Canyon, it's Cal Baptist, and it's Denver. And that's about it, unless you're willing to go substantially farther. And I don't think I'm telling tales out of school to say like, hey, they've talked to those schools and had a couple of those conversations, right? But then she was saying, listen, times have changed. And we're in a situation that's much more fluid. We have to be a lot more proactive. And our experience with BYU has changed our minds a little bit, because BYU is a church school, not located in California or exactly on the coast. They're in the mountain time zone. But BYU is very different from most other schools in the WCC, not just ecclesiastically, that's definitely true, but BYU is huge. Like, you could fit 3 WCC gyms in the Marriott Center. BYU's got it's one of the 3 biggest private schools, I think, in the entire country. Their budget, both with FBS football, their history, their structure here is substantially different from Pepperdine or Pacific or Portland. And Gloria was telling me, like, our experience with BYU has showed that we can be a little bit more flexible. Like, was BYU a very good program for us? Yes. Did they win everything? No. Much to ask any BYU basketball fan. Like, you went and played in a high school gym every year and you lost. And you did that in multiple sports despite all of your money, which I think has given the league the freedom here to think maybe we can expand our criteria a little bit more, whether that is to include a school like Grand Canyon, which is more similar to BYU in some ways, very different in other ways, or potentially ask straight up, hey, would you guys take a public school? And she said, yeah, if they fit in other ways right now, if they were going to be additive to our league and they fit other criteria, yes. So if you are an amateur realignmentologist or whatever, you should expand your target list a little bit, because situations have changed and they're willing to be a little bit more flexible. And that's kind of what happens when you're in unprecedented times, right? We only take AAU schools unless the right school comes along that's not in the AAU, and then maybe we change our mind. We only take schools that fit X, Y, and Z. But shit. Like, if the Pac-12 falls apart in 4 years, could the WCC take Stanford or maybe Cal for at least for basketball stuff? I wouldn't say that's impossible. Depending on what else kind of shakes down. So I can understand, hey, maybe we don't need to grab Seattle tomorrow. Let's wait to see what happens in 18 months. Maybe things look a little bit different. And that's, I think, would inform why they've acted the way that they have.
Yeah, I think the public school thing was the eye opener for me, at least, just expressing that publicly, because it does expand. There's just a limited number of institutions out west. I mean, I think that's kind of there is a bit of an untold story just in terms of the limitations of schools out there. I think that's something that certainly anybody that's lived, kind of west of the Mississippi and especially in, west of the Rockies. I mean, there's just the schools you got to go to. You got to get on an airplane or you're driving long distances. It is not like the Midwest. It is not like certainly the East Coast. And that's just a different thing that a lot of these commissioners kind of have to contend with. You're either in a massive population center or you're really off the beaten path. And, it does limit your options in terms of just the sheer numbers, but that can lead to some advantages. And I'm going to be very curious just in terms of the timeline. She didn't really get into that too much in terms of essentially like when that actually might happen. But you got to think that, eventually they're going to try things out as an odd number conference. But I can definitely see, a couple others getting into the mix as they make improvements to their facilities, as they go through this Division One, re-transformation or whatever you want to term it over the next year or two, and then kind of reset and see where they're at. But it's going to be very interesting because they're not the only league that's going to be jockeying for some members, not only out west, but I think in general, kind of at this level of kind of mid majors.
Yeah, I don't. If you had asked me this like 7 months ago, I'd be like, just add Grand Canyon already. Like this get over yourselves and make my life a little bit easier. Now I understand waiting a little bit. And I think if you remain interested in one of the 4 schools that I talked about, I think you will still be able to get them in 6 months. But if you want to see if there's still a whack, if you want to see what happens with the Pac-12, because we don't have a complete finality with what's happening with that league yet vis-a-vis the Big Ten. There's reason to wait. And if you want to wait to see what Division One looks like in case anybody else kind of shifts up or down or something, and then you can make your decision. And if that means you have a year or two with an odd number of teams, it's not the worst thing in the world. I'm sure Santa Clara and Gonzaga are going to be fine. Anyway, you can go read all of that. And you can read some of the other dispatches that I'll be dropping from Charlotte over the end of this week and next week, trying to get some more academic information about what's happening with all of the money, how schools are raising it, how they're spending it, and how that may or may not go to athletes and brands over the next couple of days. Brian, you are in the middle of some pretty interesting conversations with HeadCoachU as well.
Yeah, just talked with Tim Murphy on an episode that came out on Tuesday. The Harvard head coach, been there 3 decades, hard as it is to believe, but really some interesting insight just in terms of how the Ivy League operates from a coaching perspective, the type of athletes that he recruits. It was really fascinating conversation. I do get the sense that Bronco Mendenhall, my co-host on the HeadCoachU project, was all about the Ivy League model. Just kind of outside of maybe competing at the highest level, but I think he understands the appeal from an academic and athletic marriage perspective and how those two kind of coexist, because it is a very unique model in terms of not offering scholarships, not having access to the FCS playoffs. This is very much about the Ivy League season and the Ivy League season itself. But at the same time, you're recruiting guys that also can end up going on to not only be doctors and lawyers, but run billion-dollar companies. And that is just kind of the pool of candidates that Harvard is in. So it's interesting to kind of get Tim and his perspective on that. Somebody who's been around the block. Used to be at Cincinnati as well. Not too often do you hear of a head coach going from Cincinnati to an Ivy League job, but that was kind of the state of things before he got there at UC. So we got into those days as well, but fun times there on the HeadCoachU podcast, as well as jumping on with a lot of other Connect pieces throughout the week as well.
You can, could you imagine somebody going from Cincinnati to a higher profile job in college football? I don't think that would ever happen. Appreciate you listening and reading, everybody. If you enjoy this show, it is enormously beneficial to us, especially as we are having some new conversations with potential sponsors and potential partners, to smash the recommendation button. Tell people on Twitter, tell people on Reddit, tell people on message boards, tell people on unclaimed billboards off various state highway systems about Going for Two and about Extra Points. That helps all of this stuff grow. There is an off chance that I will not be on the next show. Maybe Brian will book some special musical guests. In the meantime, thanks for listening, everybody. We'll catch up with you again very soon.